Thank you for joining us on Triton College's YouTube channel for our first ever episode of Conversations at Triton. I'm Meredith Davis, and this is Black History Month. I'm so excited because my guest today is Shaka King. He is a New York-based film and television director and writer. In 2020, Mr. King was recognized as one of Variety's 10 screenwriters to watch. He has written and directed independent film shorts and won the coveted Someone to Watch honor at the Independent Spirit Awards for his film Newlyweds, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2013. The film, which we will discuss today, is Mr. King's first studio feature film, and it is about Illinois Black Panther Party Chairman Fred Hampton, who is from Maywood, and his fateful betrayal by FBI informant William O'Neill. Mr. King, thank you for joining us today. Let's talk about Judas and the Black Messiah. When I'm talking to people about this movie, I've been describing it as being about Fred Hampton, but now having read the script, it seems to be just as much about William O'Neill, if not more, as Fred Hampton. What made you and Will Burson tell the story from O'Neill's perspective?
Well, the movie isn't quite from O'Neill's perspective. I think that that's a trick that we pull in terms of making people think that because you have the interview device peppered throughout the film.
Mhm.
But the scenes that really focus on Fred are actually more from Deborah's perspective than anyone else's perspective.
I see. Okay.
And the reason, and I mean, I think it's something that I didn't realize that you only read the script. You didn't watch the movie yet, so I think it's something that comes across even more clearly in the movie, but maybe not. I mean, you might even feel even more like O'Neill's POV because you'll be seeing the interviews, and that might, sway your opinion even more so. But I think the sort of the you know almost business reasons for making the movie that way, and then there's the political reasons for making the movie. And it started with the business reason in the sense of, you just weren't going to get a Fred Hampton biopic made in Hollywood.
Mhm.
Traditional Fred Hampton biopic made in Hollywood. It's just not happening, and there's a number of reasons. For starters, just the industry doesn't make what they call mid-budget movies anymore. They don't make mid-budget dramas, right?
Okay.
Because all you see now is, for the most part, tentpole films dominating the sort of studio space, right? Star
Mhm.
Wars, Marvel, you only really see mid-budget movies, dramas, what people call adult films. You really only see those made for Oscar season.
Okay.
And so the numbers have dwindled. And so when you look at those movies, usually, I think that this is really the first year that I can think of where, a number of like really significant number of those movies aren't directed by and starring white actors and,
Mhm.
coming from the minds of white creatives. But by and large, that has been the case. And a lot of times when you see biopics, they fall into that range. They
Mhm.
cost that much, and they're called, people call them Oscar bait, right? Because they're made for
Okay.
Oscar season, a lot of them, biopics. Now, when you look at biopics, some of our most iconic Black leaders in history, Black figures in history, have not had biopics. There's not a Louis Armstrong biopic, you know, um, you name it. If you wanted to make a traditional Fred Hampton biopic in the studio system, the first obstacle you run into is that he doesn't have name recognition in Hollywood, let alone, like, if we're being fully honest, and we talk about Fred Hampton in our community, a lot of people know the name growing up. Some
But they're
people
not
might know
sure.
how he was assassinated, but they don't know. They're like, I heard that name growing up. Maybe they knew it was a Black Panther, but in a lot of ways, a lot of us don't know about Fred Hampton. So
Mhm.
you are going to just have a challenge industry wise trying to make traditional Fred Hampton biopic. And I'm not even acknowledging the fact that you're making a movie about a Black socialist revolutionary, and his politics being another impediment to making a traditional Fred Hampton biopic. So what's brilliant to me about the idea that the Lucas brothers pitched me was that they said, we want to make a movie about Fred Hampton and William O'Neill that we see as the departed set inside the world of COINTELPRO, right? And for
Mhm.
me, that was like, okay, here's an opportunity, as Fred Hampton Jr. says, to put the medicine inside the applesauce. You know what I'm saying? And that to me was a great reason to tell it from that vantage point. And I think another thing that you get to do when you do that is, I think there's no really, like, you look at a superhero movie, any superhero movie, right? The movie's about the hero, but it's also about the villain. And the villain is almost always the opposite of the hero, because
Right.
how do you highlight the hero's traits that make him heroic,
Mm-hmm.
other than to contrast them against the villain's qualities, right? So even though we didn't set up, because I don't, we're not making a superhero movie. We're making a movie about people. And I think it'd be a missed opportunity as a filmmaker, and I think just a thinking person, to make this character in William O'Neill purely villainous, as opposed to give him layers of complexity so that you as a viewer can put yourself in that position and interrogate what decisions you would make in that position. And I think
Right.
if you do so truthfully, you you come away, just, I think, asking questions as opposed to having answers, which is the way I want to always leave an audience.
Mm-hmm. And you're touching on one of the questions I wanted to ask. Some of the differences and similarities between Fred Hampton and William O'Neill. Some of their differences might be a little bit more obvious, but are there areas or are there places where you thought that they were more alike?
I mean, they're from the same neighborhood, Maywood,
Mm-hmm.
Illinois, but I think they were actually existed on polar opposites of humanity. I think the only sort of similarity they have is that both of them wanted freedom and wanted power, but I think they had very different definitions of what freedom and power was.
That
They
look
had
like.
very different definitions and very different ways about about
Mhm,
this, attaining those things.
mhm. Okay. The film was shot in Cleveland, and but obviously one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you is the local connection. Fred Hampton attended Proviso East High School in Maywood, which I went to Proviso East High School, and he enrolled here at Triton. But to my knowledge, he withdrew and then attended Crane, I think, which was
Hmm.
later became is now known as Malcolm X. Did you and the actors come to Maywood, or did you go to the west side of Chicago? And
Yeah.
what did you experience? Can you
So
tell me about some of the
yeah,
experiences?
I went to the west side of Chicago independently for about a week and a half, before, during the screenwriting phase.
Okay.
And I also, myself, Ryan Coogler, one of my producers, Charles King, one of my other producers, we visited, and Zinzi Evans Coogler, another one of our producers, we visited Maywood when we went and visited Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. the first time, and went to his childhood home, to
Hmm.
Fred Hampton's childhood home, and then we went back a number of times. And I should say, Daniel also spent time on the West Side on his own, just trying to get a sense of the space,
Hmm.
and just the people, and just feel some connection to the area.
What struck me most about Fred Hampton was his age. Not only was he killed when he was 21, but Mark Clark, who's from Peoria, Illinois, who also was killed the same night as Fred Hampton, was 22. They were basically what we now refer to as college kids. But the activism work he had done as a teenager made him a target of the FBI. Can you tell us about the research you did as a writer and also director on this film to understand the tactics, to understand what the FBI's stance was, why they were after Mr. Hampton, why they were after the Black Panther Party? Just give me a little bit of background of maybe some of the papers you read or books you read or what other type of research you did.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many. I need to actually go and look at what I had here, because I can tell you specifically.
Hmm.
I read Nine Lives of Black Panther. Um, uh, I got a bunch in there too. I mean, I read a bunch of books that the Panthers themselves read, Wretched of the Earth by Franz Fanon. I read A Taste of Power by Elaine Brown. I read Assassination of Fred Hampton. What's that book? Oh man, I have a bunch in the other room. Fire on the Prairie, which talked about like Chicago politics after the assassination. There's
Hmm.
another book called Search and Destroy. That's a report by this independent commission that was formed to look into the assassination, and that was, I mean, it was so incredibly specific. It was how we were able to recreate the assassination,
Oh, wow.
almost
Okay.
in detail because of that book.
Which book was that
Um,
again?
it's called Search and Destroy.
Mhm.
It's a report by this independent commission. Yeah, you can
Okay.
see. I have a bunch more in that other room. There's a famous book. It's like, let me just go over there. Let's see, pardon the mess. Black Against Empire. That's what I was thinking of. That's like exhaustive. But this was really key, even though there's some misinformation in here, but there's
Uh-huh.
some good stuff in here, from the ballot to the bullet. That was
Oh,
really useful.
one of our professors here had the author of that book speak here maybe about a month or so ago.
Yeah, that was one of the first books I read. Super useful.
Is it
This
true?
book
Is it true you spent 4 years with this project?
I did. I did.
Okay.
Oh, this book was clutch. This is like where I got all of the speeches I used at Fred.
Okay. Black Panther
So
speak.
yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, I read everything I could get my hands on. I read articles, but nothing kind of is a substitute for oral history, and like
Mhm.
going to Chicago, Illinois and sitting with former Panthers and talking to them about their experience, which I did that as well.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, a
That's
bunch of
pretty
stuff.
awesome. I was reading an Atlantic article and it quoted you as saying, "We made every step possible to basically immerse you in 1968 and 69, but at the same time, you can't help but think about now." What would you say are the similarities between the late 60s and now? Because I just asked you if it was true that you spent 4 years with the project. So that would have meant before coronavirus, before the recent Black Lives Matter and police brutality protests and the change of administration. So what would you say some of the similarities between that time and now you see?
I think one thing specifically today is that we are, as Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. said in an interview we did with him recently, he was like, we're living in revolutionary times. And we are. When he said it, I was like, it's so true. You look back at the events of 68, all those people who'd been, all those leaders, all those like, you know, individuals who were really changing the culture and how they were assassinated and wiped out.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, that really destabilized things, not dissimilar to the way the pandemic and the handling of the pandemic destabilized things. I mean, I don't know that you have the same reaction on the part of people across the globe to George Floyd being murdered on television as I don't know you have that same reaction without the pandemic. You know, the same way in 1968, where people's as Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. says, the political pores were open.
Mhm.
People's political pores are open in a way that they haven't been, even though, you know, these same issues that we've been dealing with and people have been fighting against have remained consistent, long before 1968, up until now. I do think that just from a cultural perspective, people are questioning a lot more, suspicious a lot more, um, not falling for this like lie of American exceptionalism.
Mhm.
That myth it's dead, and that I think is similar to the way things were in 68, 69.
Okay. I've seen um I've seen a couple interviews with Lakeith, and I thought it was interesting that when he said he initially received the script and thought for sure he'd be Fred Hampton, only
Mm-hmm.
to find out he was the preferred choice for William O'Neill. And he was struck that he even kind of looked like the real O'Neill. Both he and Daniel have talked in the interviews that I could find about the difficulties and the heaviness of the characters and the subject matter. What can you tell us about the atmosphere on set? And as a director, what kind of instructions do you give your actors to immerse themselves in this era?
I mean, it's day to day in terms of the atmosphere on set. It was always a collaborative, um, you know, respectful, um, nurturing, you know, and just open. Um, some days were heavy, some days weren't so heavy.
Hmm.
Um, there were a lot of heavy days though, especially towards the end because we were shooting the drugging scene, the assassination scene. A lot of the heavier stuff came later. But there were also just some real days of joy, quite frankly.
Hmm.
The day that we shot the I'm a Revolutionary speech. That's one of the most joyful experiences of everyone who took part in the production on that day. Everybody will we'll go to our graves. When we think about our careers and this profession, it's like remembering that day. All of us, I really do believe, feel that way.
Okay.
Um, and in terms of you asked what would I communicate to them?
Or just as a director, what kind of instruction do you give them to immerse themselves in that
The
time period?
the bulk of my work in terms of preparing them takes place long before on set.
Okay.
And it's conversations, music, imagery, anything that is going to help them access the person they're trying to play and put themselves in the time frame that we're shooting the thing.
Okay.
And so it's I have anything I've found, any knowledge that I've attained, I give to them, and they're welcome to have at it.
Why was it so important to you to tell this story?
Honestly, it was the thing that sealed the deal for me was reading his words. You know, the opportunity to put forth some of those ideas in a massive piece of pop culture. Knowing who we had attached, well, who I wanted to attach, who I thought we could attach, and just seeing the potential for it. Like I was like, I've never heard these ideas. I've never personally, having read that, I was like, I've never heard these ideas presented this way, in such a way that's like so accessible and quite frankly entertaining. You know, um, if we could take those ideas and put them in, this vessel that reaches millions of people across the globe, and they can hear them and take them in, and just also just go on this ride, you know, even though this is a tragic movie, if we can captivate them in this way and give them this knowledge and also have this opportunity to not just humanize this icon, but humanize this massive, historical organization and movement that has been defamed and, portrayed in this terrible light historically in movies, not just in media, but largely in cinema too. It was just too great an opportunity to pass up. You
Hmm.
know, I majored in political science. When I was a junior, I started taking film courses and immediately knew I wanted to do film. Like probably by my senior year, that was what I wanted to be when I got out of there. And then I took 7 years to work in education because I didn't know how to get into film. But
I
I was
see.
simultaneously making things on the side, writing. You know, I was writing screenplays, learned how to write screenplays while working a job, learned how to direct, bought a film camera, was shooting, on a Bolex, learned how to do that, and shot some music videos, like was working it, but realized that in order to get the education that I really needed, I would have to really invest full time in studying filmmaking. And so I went to grad school after 7 years of working just in the world and just gambled, you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Like took out a bunch of living loans and just kind of gambled, you know?
So you went to NYU, right?
Yeah.
If you had not attended graduate school and earned your MFA, do you think you still would have worked in TV and films?
No.
Okay. So you're sitting in poli sci 301. And what was the spark or what was the flame that was like, you know what, I want to go, I want to make movies. Like I want to try recording some films.
I didn't even want to do poli sci.
Hmm.
I wanted to write fiction.
I see.
and they didn't have a writing major in my college. So filmmaking was the closest that I got to that. And when I didn't, my friend, my editor, Kristen Sprague, my longtime editor and best friend from college, he was a film major, and you couldn't take courses till your junior year. You couldn't take rather production courses till your junior year. And he started taking them, and he was like, "Yo, this is fun." And he was like, "I don't have a part. You needed partners." He's like, "I don't have a partner that I really like. Like you already fulfilled your political science requirements. You should just like try to take some courses." And I basically told him I was going to double major in political science and filmmaking, so I could take the prerequisites while taking the the production courses, and then without them knowing, I just dropped the prerequisites and just kept taking the production courses. And by the time they found out it was too late.
Got it. So you're a New Yorker. You went to undergrad in upstate New York and graduate school right in New York City. How have your experiences in those surroundings influenced the stories you want to tell?
In New York or in college and undergrad, and college and
Either,
grad school? I
either,
mean,
either.
New York is like literally, it's like I'm so connected to being from New York, to being from Brooklyn, and when I came up, that is literally such a big part of my identity. It's like there's no separating me from where I'm from.
Hmm.
Um, and in terms of like college, it shaped me just in terms of the people I met, and especially undergrad. I didn't have a ton of friends in undergrad, but the friends I made in undergrad, they changed my life. They to this day still, they're just incredibly brilliant minds, um, and shape my politics. To just they're everything.
How would you advise students to use their experiences and surroundings?
Well, it depends. I mean, specifically, you're talking about students involved in a creative endeavor, or
Yes.
students, or just
So,
okay,
students that are interested in storytelling, whether it be screenwriting,
got it.
whether it be writing a book.
I've always drawn. I mean, especially in my early stuff, but even now, the way I work from the inside out in a lot of ways. Um, so I always started with the first thing that I ever wrote in high school uh, was about some friends of mine, and it was a fictionalized version of you know us, but it was still based on them. My first feature length film was about both characters were about me, you know. Uh, and this movie, I'm now, when you step outside of doing things directly related to you, you're able, but when you step outside of things that are directly related to you, but you've spent so much time making things that are about you.
Hmm.
You've done that, as I did. Like not everything I did in undergrad, or rather grad school, like all my shorts, they weren't about me. But you do get to a place where when you're creating characters like a William O'Neill, who's a real person, but there wasn't a lot known about him. So you're doing detective work, but you're also like placing yourself in that headspace. And I think that you learn a lot about humanity and just the sort of wide spectrum of humanity by, I think, doing some like personal interrogation when you're making something about your life or someone you know.
Hmm.
So I think that there's a lot of value in kind of mining, your own life for stories, um, even when it comes to telling stories about that are outside of your life experience.
Okay. Can you give advice, or what advice would you give to maybe our students from suburban Chicago, or anyone that is not in New York, LA, or even Atlanta, that maybe doesn't have immediate access to resources or entry level opportunities in the TV and film industry? What would you tell them if they're trying to start out?
I believe it's important, and this is not this was taught to me by my producing teacher Bob Nixon when I was in grad school. He would always talk about figuring out what you have access to, and building this, especially when you first start out and you don't have a dime, building your stories around what you have, as opposed to like, you know, you might have a fascination with space. And, if you want to make a movie that takes place in outer space, do you have a way to shoot that in a room that you paint black, and have like, is there something you can do with lights and just paint to, what I mean? Like, what can you do? What do you have access to?
Like using your
I
resources
using
creatively.
always. It's just like, even to this day, my second, I mean, not my, a short I made a short called Moulignons after I made Newlyweds. And I never thought that I would make a short, after I made my first feature. But, you know, I had my sort of hopes dashed against the rocks and got into a dark place and realized I needed to just make something. And so I wanted to make something, and I was broke. I had like very little money. Uh, and I scrounged together $500 and, made this short for $500. And I was like, well, I have a stoop. I need I have a stoop. I have these clothes. I can get some cheap clothes. Besides that, I need 3 cameras, which I'll borrow from friend or from friends. I'll have the people who own those cameras shoot it, and I'll have my friend record sound. I'll pay them with pizza because I don't have any money. Uh, and we won't need lights. We'll shoot it during the day. We'll have some bounce boards, and some reflectors. Um, and we have 6 hours, of daylight. So let's go. You know what I'm saying? Uh, and we did it. You know, 500. And I remember from that moment on being like, I'm not spending more than $1,000 on a short ever again. And in grad school, my first short, because I'm living on loans, I'm taking out student loans. I spent over $12,000 on my first short, you know, wastefully, and I didn't need to, you know. Um, so I think about what you have access to and write. See if your imagination can envision a story that you can craft around the things that you have at your disposal.
Okay.
Because yeah, I mean, and also I think another key piece of advice is to, and this is the biggest, is to find your voice and find the things that are important to you and find the things you have to say that no one else has to say. Because you could come to a major city and there's many different ways to get, you know, to direct professionally. There's the apprenticeship route, where you just like, okay, start out in the camera department, or start out usually PAing and kind of work your way up. But that takes longer. And, you know, those folks are going to ground you in the dust. They don't care about your aspirations.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always believed that, the if you really want to direct, first thing you should probably learn is how to write.
I wanted to speak with you about the film because of the local connection, number one, but also number two, it's Black History Month. Why do you think telling Black stories are so important?
I think there's a number of reasons. One, because they haven't been shared far and wide. Um, and as time progresses and we start to lose just ancestors, as they die off, a lot of that oral history, a lot of that history, because a lot of it wasn't printed, we lose a connection to. And we lose the opportunity to learn, I think, to learn from mistakes they made and be inspired by the victories that they achieved, and just the not even and the victories not even being the end result, but just like our survival, quite frankly. So that's like one reason, but we also have great stories. You know what I'm saying? Like we're amazing, you know. So um our stories are full of drama, you know, and people overcoming impossible odds. They make for some of the best stories. Um, you know, there's a million reasons.
Great, great. That is all I have for you. Unless you have questions for us,
No,
I promised an hour. We're at 3:01. That's all she wrote.
cool,
Thank you so
great.
much. I
I'm
really
glad.
appreciate this. I mean, we're
My
so
pleasure.
excited to be able to talk with you, and we're waiting for the film to come out. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.